The test is testing your ability to read and comprehend individual sentences, and that has nothing to do with the question type. Hello and welcome to episode 513 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. I'm Ben Olson, one of the founders of LSAT Demon and the LSAT Demon Daily podcast. With me is Josh Mansfield, teacher here with the Demon. Anything else we should say about you, Josh? You're also the producer of this show now. And
yeah, I've been intern. I'm not sure, so I stick with teacher. I feel like it's the safest. But I feel like I've graduated. I've gone from the Demon Dailies to the Thinking LSAT now. So
yeah,
this is the big leagues, right, Ben?
Yeah, this is. I mean, well, it's big for us. Yeah,
that's right.
Okay, cool. And then you're going to law school in the fall, so that's exciting. Correct. And great. Well, thanks, Josh. Thanks for joining today. I don't know where Nate is, but he is off today and probably, hopefully, having fun. Let's jump into this first item. So recently, the New York Times reported about a law student who won an award for a racist article. The title of this article in the New York Times is "A White Nationalist Wrote a Law School Paper Promoting Racist Views. It won him an award." The point of bringing this up is not so much to talk about this white nationalist or the paper that won him an award. It's more to talk about some of the things that happened to students who, were asked about this and the consequences of that. That said, do you want to say anything else about this paper, or I guess it was...
No, I mean, it's a pretty crazy article. We'll link it in the show notes, so make sure to give it a look. But I agree, Ben. I think the most interesting part about this was buried near the end of the article. It was a ways down. You have to really dig. But there's a really interesting paragraph that is included in this article. So what that says, one former student who graduated in May had his post-graduation job offer rescinded by a large law firm when he told them he had spoken to the New York Times for this article, criticizing the paper and the professor for the class, who is a judge, for granting him the award. The student asked not to be identified for fear of jeopardizing other job offers.
Yeah. That's wild. So the New York Times reached out to people, obviously, including this student. And then this student turned around and provided information criticizing this paper and criticizing the professor who awarded this paper with some award. And then the student told the firm that the student was going to end up working at. And they said, you know what? You're no longer working here. So what's the takeaway?
This it's interesting because this isn't the first time that we've seen political affiliations affect people's job outcomes, especially in like big market, big law firm in recent times. I remember during the Palestinian conflict, Palestine-Israel conflict protests that happened at law schools and universities across the country. There were law firms that were like changing job offers because of those protests if you participated. So it's not like this is necessarily novel, but I think it's an important highlight that what you say to your employers matters and it matters in that political insight and how you are engaging in broader political discussions, especially at these big law firms.
Yeah, and it's highly unlikely that this law firm disagreed with the views that this student had. The student was complaining or criticizing about someone who wrote a racist paper. It's highly unlikely the law firm disagrees with those views, but it's not about whether your law firm agrees or disagrees. They're saying, hey, look, we don't want people working here who are raising these political issues that could reflect back on the firm in any way, especially in light of the fact that the Trump administration has gone after big law firms. So they're probably hypersensitive at this point. But the bottom line here is that when you're in law school and applying for jobs, think about the things you express online, either in your own personal social media or just more broadly, even to a reputable newspaper like the New York Times.
Yeah. And Ben, I don't think that waits until you're applying for jobs. A lot of our audience here are law school applicants.
Mm-hmm.
What are you putting in your personal statement?
Mm-hmm.
You might think that this idea of advocacy or interviews is important, but every bit of information that you put in your application, in your personal statement, in interviews, that's going to be used, and they're going to make decisions based on how they believe that will reflect on them as a law school, how that's going to look to future employers. And so you have to be hyper conscious of what you are expressing, and really focusing in on, here's why I'm going to be a great lawyer.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they write their personal statement and they decide to talk about some political view or perspective, they're inclined to believe that the person who is reading it is going to be sympathetic to that view. But that's just human nature to project our views onto other people. Even if they agree with you, they may say, hey, look, the way you're talking about it is overly simplistic or
Mm-hmm.
not thoughtful or whatever. So it's best just to steer clear of that and focus on how you have succeeded professionally. What have you done? It's okay if you've worked for a political organization. You just
Sure.
focus less on the ideology and more on the work that you did for them and how you did it well.
Yeah. Even we've seen, and I've seen you and Nate talk about on the Personal Statement Gong Show, people who do really legitimate work in all sorts of occupations
Mm-hmm.
will tank personal statements when they start editorializing about the nature of human society and the impact that they had on society, and those broader kind of both philosophical, ideological, political discussions.
Yeah. And it's also not surprising because the schools almost invite this by saying, "Hey, we champion justice and we want
Mm-hmm.
equality." And so then people hear that and they say, "Oh yeah, so do I. Here's my particular brand of that." And that's where things can go off the rails.
Yeah. All to say, be careful what you put online. Be careful what you say, what you give away.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right, so this next one is from Ellie. The subject line is "Save my RC."
Hi, guys. I started studying for the LSAT about a month ago, and I've been using the LSAT Demon since then. Before doing any prep, I took an untimed diagnostic and scored a 154, though now I realize that score wasn't a reliable baseline since I had unlimited time. I scored over 80% on RC in that test and assumed it would be my strongest section, so I focused most of my time on LR. Now I'm consistently scoring around -4, -4 to -6 on LR, which I feel encouraged by just after 1 month. But I recently took a full timed practice test and scored a 156 overall with a -12 in RC. That section felt like it fell apart under the clock, and I'm realizing I really don't understand how to approach it effectively during time conditions. Aiming for a 170 score, and I'd appreciate your advice on how to start closing the RC gap. Thanks so much for your time. It's been a huge help already. Best, Ellie.
Great. Well, one thing that Ellie did, which a lot of people do, is they pick one section and then they just target that section. They just want to get good at that. And then they want to go get good at the other things. So, Ellie, I don't think you've done anything wrong here except for ignore reading comprehension. So these results aren't surprising. If you had focused more on it up front, you probably would be in a better position. So all you need to do now is turn your focus to reading comprehension without losing focus on logical reasoning, and do the same things that you're doing there. You said you're getting -4 to -6 on logical reasoning. Reading comprehension in many ways is easier than logical reasoning because you still have to read and understand the passage, but mainly all you have to do is figure out what must be true on the basis of that information rather than figuring out what is flawed about the reasoning or describing things in very technical terms. You just have to read and understand what is in those 15 to 17 sentences in one passage and then determine what must be true on the basis of them. I strongly suspect that you need to slow down in reading comprehension and focus on doing maybe 2 passages at this point. And then once you get good at those 2 passages, then start working on maybe starting the 3rd passage, not even finishing it. But if you do that, you're going to get your accuracy way up. And then over time, you'll see your reading comprehension scores increase.
Yeah, I agree that that minus 12 probably is not 12 unattempted questions that weren't done and that she's getting 100% accuracy. The suspicion is that there's probably missing more that she's attempting as well. Get
Mhm.
that accuracy up to 100%. And Ben, you you gave on the podcast me. I consider it my episode. I don't remember what episode it was. When I was studying for the LSAT, you
Yeah.
gave the single most impactful piece of advice for my LSAT journey, and that was that you should spend 80% of your time in RC reading the passage.
Mm.
When I was first doing it, my mode of working, the way I saw RC was read the passage as fast as I could,
Mm.
because then I had time to go back during the questions and check my answers and go look for what I needed. And I thought, well, that's, I'm going to have to do that anyway, so I might as well just save myself as much time as possible to do that. And I flipped that around, started spending 80% reading the passage, and my RC skyrocketed.
Mm.
So my suspicion as well for Ellie is that she's probably struggling with questions that otherwise would be easy if she was just reading the passage in order to become an expert in it.
Yeah.
And that's probably another area. One last thing I want to point out for Ellie here, though, on the scores, Ellie went from a 154 untimed to a 156 timed.
Mm.
That's a pretty significant improvement. It might only look like 2 points, but if you're doing all the time in the world to now under the time, like the time and not finishing sections, that's probably a really, really excellent improvement. So you should be pretty encouraged by that.
Yeah, I actually had the same thought as I read those numbers. It's funny though, because you don't feel it, right? Like you don't
Right.
there's a sense that you're like, well, I got a 154 untimed. I don't know what that is. And because you don't know what it is, it's hard to really latch on to any sort of improvement. So you kind of focus on the 2 points, but it's way more than 2 points. So
Yeah.
you're making progress. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep up the great work and really treat all those questions as must be trues. Become an expert in the passage.
Awesome. Demon team member Billy, who runs our Ask team, if you've ever asked a question using the Ask button, Billy and his rather large team of tutors and teachers and writers has responded to your question. But anyways, Billy is going to be hosting an AMA on Instagram Live on Tuesday, July 15th. That's at LSAT Demon on Instagram. Check it out. How does that work? You said it says Tuesday, July 15th. How long is he actually going to be on there? And when?
Sorry, he's going to be on there for an hour. He's going to be getting on at 5:30 p.m. Pacific, 8:30 p.m. Eastern.
Okay.
So it'll be in the evening after work. It'll be for an hour. Jump on, go ask Billy whatever questions you want. He's done the application process. He obviously sees a lot of questions as the head of the Ask team, and so you can go ask him anything, and going to be a really awesome opportunity. I mean, Billy's great resource, and so it'll be awesome to get to ask him some of those questions you've got.
Excellent. We also have a free live class coming up. All you need is a Demon free account. I'm going to be teaching that class. That's on Monday, July 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern. So it's a midday class for all you Eastern time folks. I don't know what I'll be doing, but it'll either be logical reasoning or reading comprehension. I just alternate between those things. I should check this out. So you can just go to lsatdemon.com/free, and that will take you to the class, and we can figure out what I am teaching. I'm going there right now. Sorry.
I like, Ben, that you said you're teaching either LR or RC. As if there was another option.
I know you could go off on like some tangents, right? I guess
you could. It could be an admissions class, maybe.
Yeah, that's true. People are like, what did I sign up for? No. Okay, it looks like it's going to be logical reasoning. So that's pretty logical reasoning class. I mean, I think reading comprehension classes are fun as well, but there's something fun about each different topic that we'll have to encounter as we go through logical reasoning questions. So we'll end up doing 6 logical reasoning questions. You'll have time to do them in class, and then I will start going over them. So you'll have a chance to get them right or wrong, and then we'll discuss them as a group. But anyways, sign up for that at lsatdemon.com. All you need is a free account.
Great. Next up, Ben, we've got an email here from Joshua who wants to know what should professors put in their letters of recommendation.
Okay. Hi, guys. I'm planning on applying to law school. Depending on when my LSAT practice test scores are in the range I want them, I'm currently in undergrad and I'm focused primarily on maintaining a high GPA. However, I thought it best to confirm with a few professors that they would write me a recommendation letter before I graduate. I have 2 confirmed and a third if necessary. Both professors have asked me what they should play up or focus on in their letters, and I'm not sure what to tell them. Should they focus on my character traits like hard work, or perhaps the skills I've shown in their coursework? Been a listener for a few months now and really appreciate the advice you give. Thanks, Joshua.
This is a question that I got as well when I was applying from my letter of recommendation writers, who asked me, what do you want your letter of recommendation to focus on? He talks a little bit about character traits. I don't think slight mentions of those are a bad thing, but the letters of recommendation, as all your application materials, should be a reflection of why you're going to make a good law student and why you're going to make a great attorney. And so I think if you can have a letter of recommendation that discusses your work product, particular projects, papers, the skills that you've shown in that work product, that to me feels like the most important element. And it's where I personally asked my recommenders to focus their papers on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you're applying to law school. That means you're applying to an academic endeavor. So letters of recommendation from professors are, it should be relatively easy because the professor just needs to write about how you did well in their class. What did you do well on in that particular class? What did they notice about you? If they can talk about a specific assignment like you're saying, great. But they gave you presumably an A. Why did they give you A? By the way, if they didn't give you an A, you probably don't want to be asking for a letter of recommendation from them. You want to find someone who gave you an A, who thought that your work product as a student was the best it could be.
But the same goes true for employers, other recommenders outside of just professors. If you're going to ask an employer for a letter of recommendation, you really want that focus to be on work product. Why were you a good employee? And maybe customer service is important, but can they talk about processes that you developed? Oversight, team management, team leads. Like, you want your letters of recommendation to reflect those skills that are going to be most important in law school and show why. And that's why so many law schools ask for letters of recommendation from professors, if possible, right? And if you're not that far removed from school, to get one from a professor.
Yeah.
The concern I have, one thing for Joshua, you do have to submit those through the Credential Assembly Service through LSAC. And so I don't know what your process with these professors are going to look like, but if they just email you that letter of recommendation, that's not going to be sufficient. When you apply to law schools, they're going to have to get an email from LSAC. They're going to have to upload it directly to the service. And so that's one consideration to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I've done that. I've gone through that process as someone who's writing a letter of recommendation, and it's not, as easy as just click, 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 but it's right. Not too bad. The hard part, of course, is writing the letter. So I am glad that Joshua is getting this taken care of, because once the letter is written, all the steps that they have to go through to upload it, although not super easy or as easy as they could be, that is the easy part. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, good luck, Joshua. Let us know, but also just, keep focused on your GPA, which it sounds like you're trying to do. And that's the most important thing, at least for now.
Yeah.
All right. This next one is from Emma. The subject is retaking classes.
I have a GPA of a 3.57. And as my first year of an undergraduate, I was going pre-med and taking classes far out of my league. I ended my first year with a GPA of a 2.0 and have gotten 4.0s ever since. But of course, those low grades impact my GPA. I'm applying for law school this upcoming cycle and was wondering if it would be worth it to retake classes in the fall to get my GPA up. I was wondering if this would even impact my application, since the application cycle begins far before I would finish the retaking classes in December. Will my GPA finishing my junior year be the GPA they look at, or do retaking classes in the first semester of my senior year have an impact?
Yes. The short answer is yes. Retaking your classes will have an impact. Is that what's LSAT going to do there? LSAT is going to average, right?
I think you would have to get the previous one completely removed from your transcript, I think.
Yeah, to avoid the averaging. I mean,
to avoid the averaging.
It's still better to get a 4.0 and then average that with your 2.0 so that you end up getting a 3.0, at least for those classes. But in an ideal world, right, you'd retake them and get your previous classes completely removed off your transcript so that LSAC doesn't average them.
You know, Ben, I actually think if she should talk to her registrar, because what's the difference of a retaken class where the old one is not pulled versus a 4.0 in a different class?
Wait.
Because presumably they'd be the same impact on the GPA, right?
Oh, you're saying, yeah, sure.
because if they're not going to remove the old classes,
yep.
I don't know if Emma should go retake OChem.
Yeah.
To try and get a better grade, because that's not a guaranteed A this next pass through. Mm-hmm. If your registrar or your at your undergraduate is not going to completely remove it from your transcript, I almost think it'd be better for her to just take classes that are the easiest A's possible.
Possibly. Yeah, that makes sense. Potentially even putting off graduation, taking classes through community college to save money, but get them to increase your GPA, because it's unfortunate, but your GPA matters a lot. And one thing that we don't know here is what Emma is scoring on her LSAT. So it's very possible that you're trying to go straight through. It sounds like you're trying to graduate from undergrad and then go right into law school. But you may need more time, one, to rehabilitate your GPA, but also to bring your LSAT score up. We don't know where that is, and you may be hurting yourself significantly on that side too.
And Emma, you're right that they are going, like, you're both right that they will look at your grades before and they will look at them after this semester. And so that might be a real reason you should not go to law school the year after you graduate. Mm-hmm. Because scholarships go out before December, and you are not going to qualify for some scholarships because of your GPA, that if you could get these removed and retake in December. So let's say, you get one of these 2.0s, you get a C or a D taken off and you replace it with an A, you will qualify for scholarships early on in the application cycle that you otherwise would not be getting. And yeah, you're right that at the end of the day, if those get replaced anyway, it's going to bump you up and you might still get some good offers, but you will miss out on scholarship money because of your GPA if you are waiting for those classes. Yeah. So you might consider waiting an extra year.
I think the fact that Emma is not mentioning her LSAT is an indication that she's not focused on it enough. Emma, I hope I'm wrong, but unless your LSAT is where it needs to be as well, it strongly seems like you need to delay your applications for a year, get your GPA and LSAT in order, and then apply early in the cycle in September with your best numbers on both fronts.
Emma, you have an amazing opportunity to still rehabilitate this GPA a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And so many students are past that point, right? Yeah. Once the bachelor's awarded, you're done. It's over. You cannot rehabilitate the GPA any further after that. And so really taking advantage of the opportunity to get your best scores is an opportunity that a lot of people don't have by the time they graduate. So make the most of it. Don't apply with this lesser GPA that even if you can't get those classes removed, 4.0, like straight A's this semester are going to bump your GPA up further.
Yeah. Well, and then if you delay a year, you're going to get both semesters, right?
And both semesters. Yeah. It just, you're going to be leaving money and possibly a lot of money on the table if you just go ahead and apply in September.
Yep.
Anything else for Emma?
No, good luck. Keep us posted.
Yeah. Next on the agenda item comes from Sydney, who says that she's plateauing in scores in timed LR sections and practice tests.
Okay. I've been drilling, doing timed logical reasoning sections, and mixing in full timed practice tests. I can see my time improving as I'm starting to consistently get to all the logical reasoning questions. I used to hit 20 and be out of time, and even my accuracy too. I've focused on getting the first 10 correct in 10 minutes and started to consistently succeed. Oh dear. But I always seem to get a -7 on every time section, even as I continue to drill, keep a wrong answer journal, review time sections, review the lessons on question types I struggle with, and attend some classes. What am I doing wrong, or what can I do to break through this negative or -7 wall?
You had some pauses in there, Ben. Some things.
Yeah, we're hitting some bumps on the road here. So, Sydney, you're way, way too focused on time. There are people who are scoring in the 170s and are not finishing logical reasoning. You are not scoring in the 170s, or it doesn't seem like you are, and you're trying to finish. And there's so many indicators here, right? I'm starting to consistently get to all of the logical reasoning questions. I don't care. That's not a goal that we want you to have. The goal we want you to have is 100% accuracy, 95 to 100% accuracy on the questions that you attempt. You say here too that I've focused on getting the first 10 correct in 10 minutes. We've never said that. What we've said is get the first 10 questions correct, however long that takes. That's it. Yeah. Just 10 out of 10 in terms of questions, not 10 questions in 10 minutes. I'm glad you claim that you're getting them correct, but the time element there is irrelevant. And even though you're getting the first 10 supposedly correct, and I guarantee you're probably not on some occasions if you're trying to do them in 10 minutes, but even if you are, that mindset is going to taint questions 11, 12, 13, 14, all the way up to 26, right? So stop trying to finish. Start trying to do near perfect accuracy on the questions that you attempt. In fact, if you finish the section, you did something wrong because you're just not at a place where you should be doing that. There are people who score, again, people who score in the high 170s and don't finish. So that's not our goal.
The other thing about a score plateau, Sydney, you say that you seem to always get -7 or miss 7 on every time section. Well, we think that if you're missing 7, that there's probably 7 that you don't understand that you got right, where you had a 50-50, 2 answers left, you weren't sure, and you got a little lucky. That probably includes questions in the first 10. And so if you're asking, well, I want to improve, I want to get through this plateau, you are missing 14 opportunities to learn this test, right? If questions 1 through 10, your only priority are, can I get them right? You're missing the incredibly important lessons about the kinds of flaws that the LSAT's going to commit, the types of arguments they're going to construct. When students tell me, I want to practice the hardest questions, they're missing the point that level 1s and level 5s use the same flaws. One just is a little bit more complicated or nuanced, or have a little bit more, they sound a little bit better, right? A little denser passage, for example. But if you can learn to spot the flaws on the level 1s, you start to see it that's hidden in all the camouflage of everything else around it. And Sydney, you're giving up those opportunities because you're focusing on 10 correct in 10 minutes. In fact, Ben, you and Nate actually tackled, I think, this exact philosophy or strategy in Thinking LSAT episode 500, where you guys debunked 11 LSAT myths. And one of them was, I can't remember if it was like 10 and 10 or 15 and 15, but it was that idea of like 1 minute per question for the first half of the test. And it's killing. That's your plateau, is that attitude right there.
No, that's an excellent point. I mean, you take the number you got wrong, that's -7, and you multiply that by 2, and that means there are 14 questions you don't fully understand, at least. And so you are not understanding more than half of the questions that you're attempting. There's Sydney also talks about keeping a wrong answer journal, which can be a huge waste of time. Here's the problem with wrong answer journals is that people check a box when they write things down. So they get a question wrong, they review it, they take some notes in their journal, and they mentally check off the review process. They're like, I have reviewed that question. Look, as proof of that, I have notes. I actually don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with taking notes. But what happens in 95% of the cases in which people keep a wrong answer journal is that they don't actually force themselves to understand the problem right then and there. They let their notes be the substitute or the excuse for full and complete understanding. They're like, well, when push comes to shove, I can't turn around and explain this to someone else, but I could turn around and point them to my notes.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And it's sad because they think that they're learning or that they're making progress because they're writing down things that they've read in the explanation, or that they viewed in a video explanation, or that they got back in an ask question. But unless you understand what someone has said to you, it doesn't matter. It's not yours, and you're not moving the ball forward in terms of learning and understanding the test.
It's so interesting that you talk about that, Ben, because I worked with a student recently who did a time test, and they said, man, I just felt so exhausted after. How do I prep myself for that without and getting used to that kind of work, and without doing lots of practice tests, right? Why am I not just doing practice tests every day? I said, if you really feel like you need to have that same time frame, do 2.5 hours of drilling.
Yeah.
Set a timer, do 70 minutes, take a 10-minute break, do 70 more minutes, and just drill and review your wrong answers. And they said, well, that just doesn't feel as difficult to me. I said, then you're probably not reviewing correctly. Because review should be as mentally arduous, if not more so, than actually even doing questions. Because you're trying to and wrestling with concepts that you obviously didn't understand because you missed the problem.
Yeah.
And to your point, just writing down why you missed it or what's different about the right answer versus the wrong answer can substitute and isn't as mentally difficult as really diving in, understanding the implications of the argument, the limits of the conclusion, how they're supported by the premises, why that answer choice interacts with it in a certain way, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Sorry, Sydney, to keep harping on different ideas in this email, but you said you review the lessons on question types I struggle with. So that also is a very, very common misconception. But the idea is that, hey, I just did a time section. I got 4 flaw questions wrong. So I must be struggling with flaw in general. And therefore, I'm going to go read a lesson about flaw questions that will help me start getting these flaw questions correct. Again, you got to go to where the problem is actually happening. The fact that you saw 4 flaw questions that were wrong in that section most likely stems from the fact that there are a lot of flaw questions on every section. It doesn't mean that you're in fact, if you got 2 conclusion questions wrong on a section and 4 flaw questions wrong on a section, if anything, that might suggest you're worse at conclusion questions because you just got all of the conclusion questions wrong and maybe only half of the flaw questions wrong. So you got some of them right as well. But anyways, don't worry about that. Just look at the question you got wrong, regardless of the question type, and try to understand what went wrong with that individual question. This is largely because the test is testing your ability to read and comprehend individual sentences, and that has nothing to do with the question type.
And even if you missed every flaw question and said, I want to review that lesson.
Yeah.
If you don't go back and then go back to those individual questions and understand those individual questions.
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, right? That lesson is not going to solve, like, that is a fine supplement, but it cannot replace understanding that individual question. If after you review those questions, as Ben's saying, you went with sentence by sentence, you fully understand, you really did this review that we're talking about, and then you want to go read the lesson on flaws, okay, sure,
Yeah.
that's fine, but it cannot replace the really nitty-gritty review work that has to come.
I'm trying to think of an analogy. I'm struggling to come up with one, but like it's almost, I'm trying to think of something that happens in someone's everyday life. So for example, you could tell someone to eat healthy, right?
Okay.
But unless you have them identify specific food choices or I don't know, purchases that they've made, unless you tell them, unless they can point out to you what about that meal is healthy and what about that meal isn't as healthy or not healthy. Everybody gets the platitude, everybody gets the general goal, and that's kind of what's happening when you read a lesson about flaw questions. You're getting this overarching goal or vision or admonition, but which is helpful. Like, oh, okay, so flaw questions are basically must be true questions. That's good to know.
Yeah.
But again, it's just it's very general, it's high level, and the problems are happening in the details. So
I think it's like counting calories and just entering in a dish and being like, oh, I had spaghetti and meatballs for dinner, as opposed to this much pasta. This is the meatball that I had. This is how much oil I used when I cook, right? Like the individual numbers are really what's going to break down pieces of the argument. Sydney, you mentioned something that, I think we've been talking about generally, but the biggest problem to me of this entire paragraph, and even my accuracy too.
Sure.
The accuracy, it's not even that you're trying to go quickly, but be accurate. Like, time is literally your priority. It's your focus.
Yeah.
That is not accuracy. I tell my students, I want you to treat your accuracy scores on time sections as if they are your letter grades in a class.
Mm-hmm.
Most of these students who are coming to us learning the LSAT, they're driven, they're used to B's or only A's. And so I tell them, if your report card over the past semester, for the past you did 3 time sections this week, and if your report card was 64%, 78%, 71%, and you had to pull out that report card, how are you feeling about that?
Yeah.
That should be devastating. You should want only A's. And if that's not your priority, then you're focused on the wrong thing.
Well said. Good luck, Sydney. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Sydney.
I hope it's motivating. Yeah.
Next up, Brian writes in, applying early decision.
Brian writes, hey guys, I feel like this is never talked about, and I was wondering how big a difference it makes, if at all, and if the pros outweigh the cons. Obviously, if I were to apply early decision, it would be to a T14 school that I feel would be worth it. However, say I am below both the LSAT and GPA medians, would applying early decision give me any real boost as opposed to applying regular decision? Also, is it true that if you do get accepted early decision, you have pretty much zero room for scholarship negotiations and you're just about locked in to pay full price? Thank you.
Brian, we hadn't talked about this on the pod for a while, so I thought this was a perfect thing to include.
Sure.
No, the pros do not outweigh the cons. I don't think the pros outweigh the cons to a T14 school. I don't think there's anywhere that the pros outweigh the cons, generally speaking, because you are 100% right, Brian. If you apply early decision, you have told the school, if you let me in, I will withdraw all other applications. I will not go to law school anywhere else. I am bound to go to your school.
Yep.
They have no incentive to offer you a scholarship at that point. None whatsoever.
I agree. Now, there are some early decision programs out there that say, hey, if you get accepted through this program, we will give you some sort of scholarship, and it may be half tuition scholarship, it may be a full tuition scholarship. But even then, what you're doing is you're locking yourself into that school. And so if you were good enough to get a scholarship there through their early decision program, then that means you're good enough to get a scholarship there through their regular decision program without being locked in. So you still have the opportunity to apply to other schools and get scholarships there, potentially better scholarships, including stipends. So fundamentally, if someone is desperate enough to apply through early decision, what it means is that they're focused on just trying to get in, which we've hopefully talked about enough, but maybe not, that it's probably just not the right play, because you're ultimately going to be near the bottom of that class and less likely to succeed when you graduate. There are small minor exceptions to that, but generally speaking, just keep your life simple. Do not apply early decision.
Like even a T14 school. What?
Nope.
If you can get into UT Austin, why can't you get into Vanderbilt and Wash U and get money from them possibly?
Yeah.
Right? You just don't know. And so why would you sign yourself up for an opportunity for that school to say, "Oh, well, we can lowball," right? Like we don't have to offer any money. The only exception that I could possibly think about is, to your point, if your top choice of school offered you full tuition plus stipend.
Sure.
For early decision.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to argue with you then, right? If that's the only way you can get a full tuition plus stipend from that school, allegedly, they give 3 out. You look at their 509 report, they give 3 out. It is to their early decision programs only. That's where you would prefer to be if you could. Then okay, that gives you access to that scholarship you otherwise would not have. And that's the only case I can even think of that the pros would come anywhere close to the cons.
I just don't think that exists, right, Josh? I mean, like if a school is offering that through their early decision program, then they're offering it through their regular decision program. So that sort of situation doesn't exist. And even yeah, and even if you're like, well, okay, great. They do it through both their early decision program and their regular decision program. So I'm going to go ahead and do their early decision program just to give myself a little bit of a boost. If you're already in that position, that's not what's giving you the boost. What's giving you the boost is your LSAT score and your GPA. And so you want to apply regular decision so that you still hold all the cards in terms of whether or not you even go there, and what you might be able to extract from other schools. That's the goal.
I don't yeah. I tried to come up with one. I really can't. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Don't
thanks for trying, Josh. It just shows.
Yeah, thanks. I tried to play the hypothetical, but thanks for writing in, Brian. We'll make sure to hit this topic once every 3 months because we usually get an email about it real quick. Don't go early decision.
Cool. All right, so now we got word of the week. This one is coming to us from Laura. You want to read her email?
Yeah. She says, "Hi, I'd like to suggest Nimrod for word of the week. Quote from Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie. Quote, in Wisconsin, as I was driving through, a hunter shot his own guide between the shoulder blades. The coroner questioning this Nimrod asked, 'Did you think he was a deer?' Thanks for the podcast and all the advice. Best, Laura."
Okay, so the word that comes to my mind when I see the word Nimrod is idiot. And this quote seems to support that word. Although, it surprises me, Josh. There are so many words that I think I know. And then when I try to verbalize the definition, I realize that I'm actually verbalizing more of a, what is it?
Colloquial,
like an amalgam of definitions, or it's more like a feeling. It's more like I have a sense of what I think that word is trying to say. And then I'm looking for other words that match that sense. So anyways, the word that came to mind here for me was idiot. But how about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. And when you jump over to Cambridge, a very stupid person is what they gave us. Here's something that's interesting I wanted to highlight, and then I actually want to circle back to that point you were making there, Ben. So there are actually other definitions. Nimrod, a term that comes from the Bible describing a hunter, was actually previously used to also describe a very skilled hunter.
Oh, wow. So the person who wrote this book is skillfully using Nimrod both to refer to an idiot and someone who is literally a hunter.
Yes, it was this is one of the most clever sentences I've seen. And so I when I was looking it up, I was like, wow, that's actually really, really excellent writing here. I mean, it's Steinbeck, so that makes sense. But I thought this sentence was pretty unique. But then that also kind of ties back in this point. Students all the time will read words on the LSAT and they'll say, oh yeah, I know what this means. We were doing counterintuitive with a student, and like, oh, I think it means this, and they had a partial definition and how it's oftentimes used and other associations with that word.
Yeah,
they thought it meant counterproductive, and yeah, sometimes things that are counterintuitive are also counterproductive, but diving into the definitions of words is the key to succeeding on the LSAT. If you don't know the technical uses of those words, and if you you need to realize that you need to stop and look them up as you're studying after you do the question.
Yeah, and I would say for the LSAT, for law school, for legal practice, I remember in law school I had a paperback dictionary, and I was looking up words every page because there are a ton of new legal words that you're learning. There's also just this tendency, I think, by judges and attorneys to try to use words to kind of, I don't know, just try to show their intelligence or something. I actually think, and we've said this on the show before, but the best way to convey your intelligence is to know these words, but then use the most common direct word. But anyways, to your point, I actually thought of another word. Just yesterday in class, we came across the word didactic, which the LSAT loves. It uses it a lot. I started describing the definition to the class, and I said, well, it means teaching or to teach or something along those lines. And then afterward, I looked it up because I was like, again, struggling a little bit.
Sure.
The definition is intended to teach. So that part was correct. But then it says, particularly in having moral instruction as an ulterior motive. And that side definition added more clarity to the sentence that we were reading. I didn't realize that when we were reading it, but it was talking about how Benjamin Franklin's autobiography had a didactic style. And I was like, so he wasn't just teaching. He was teaching with this sort of moral motivation, right? Or tone, which isn't surprising.
Yeah. Well, and you could absolutely see, and maybe it was, I don't know, I wasn't in that class, but an answer choice that discussed the moral instruction, and you would have eliminated, like, it would have been very common for anybody to just say, oh yeah, okay, that wasn't talked about at all in this passage. There's no mention of moral instruction or moral slant on this autobiography if you don't know the technical definition of the words.
Yeah. Great. Well, anything else, Josh, before we sign off?
I don't think so. Thanks for writing that in, Laura. It was a fun sentence.
Yeah, and if you want to find all these words that we've covered on the show, you can go to lsat.link/wow. That's WOW for word of the week. Anyways, lsat.link/wow. Be LSAT famous. Please ask questions or share news with us on our website, thinkinglsat.com, or on our socials at LSAT Demon. If you have questions about the LSAT Demon, email help@lsatdemon.com. You can also check out our other podcast, LSAT Demon Daily. That was episode 513 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. Thanks all y'all for listening. Nice knowing you. Don't pay for law school.